Why a prominent mainland Chinese immigrant, a community leader, was imprisoned in Canada. The trap of capitalism 34 years ago, Mr. Wei Tang, as a young university teacher and international student from a university in China, came to the so-called advanced and developed North American capitalist society with a dream of pursuing freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. More importantly, pursuing a better life. He studied both in the United States and Canada since 1978, engaged in medical research after graduation, and eventually became an influential figure as a financial entrepreneur, social celebrity, and community leader. However, he unexpectedly ended up in prison and became a criminal in Canada. Like most immigrants, Wei Tang initially believed in Canada's human rights, democracy, and freedom of belief, and believed in the fairness and impartiality of Western law and the legal system, the Canadian constitutions. However, due to his naivety, immaturity, and ignorance, his overseas success resulted in harm to himself and his beloved investors. He would regret this for the rest of his life if he could not fight back and resurrection, and he also hopes that his experience and suffering will serve as a lesson to everyone. He found that the human rights, democracy, and freedom of belief in the United States and Canada, as well as the fairness and impartiality of Western law and the legal system, were all fraudulent and aimed to attract wealthy people and talents, only to take and ruin them. Western human rights and values are a huge lie and trap, a systemic and institutional trap that is impossible to guard against. He speaks from his experience of living in North America for more than 30 years, saying that this society is full of arrogance, prejudice, discrimination, and evil force. They are under the guise of democracy, freedom, and human rights to deceive new immigrants like us. He wants to warn everyone to be careful and cautious. Wei Tang is a scholar and a natural-born financial businessman. He started small business, but with the knowledge and experience he gained from studying and living in North America, he found a lot of bigger business opportunities, such as financial trading, with unlimited potential. He started managing mutual funds for his colleagues, friends, and clients in the bank, and made a lot of money by trading daily without leverage, with an annual return of over 30%. Investors flocked to him, but his trading was interrupted after 1 year due to bank intentional restrictions. Through continuous exploration, he established an overseas Chinese partnership fund, raised and collected concentrated funds to become stronger, registered hedge funds in relevant departments in the United States and Canada, and legally managed funds. The business was flourishing with financing of tens of millions of dollars, and he would have raised and controlled several billion or even hundreds of billions if there had been no financial crisis and OSC ban. However, he did not expect that this place was full of traps, found a sinful Western capitalist society. Luckily, he did not expand too fast and too much, or he would have been even worse off. In a place and base that is anti-China and anti-communist, how could a Chinese person live and compete with banks and Wall Street? At first, he was so naive and relied on his experience and ability. He wrote a report to the chairman of China Investment Corporation, the Honourable Chairman Jiwei, suggesting that he could help them invest in the U.S. market index fund such S&P 500. However, his report may well be blocked, and he was investigated by the FBI, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and the Toronto Police, the Canadian Federal Prosecution, the Crown. He was eventually sentenced to prison for charges of fraud and securities violations, which he says that were all false charges and malicious prosecution. Wei Tang's story warns people not to blindly believe in the so-called Western human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The reality is that Western society is a trap full of lies and deceit and falsehood. One must be careful and cautious in every step. At the beginning, he was very naive and relied on his experience to write a report to the chairman of the China Investment Corporation, the Honourable Chairman Mr. Lu Jiwei. He suggested that they invest in the U.S. market index funds and short-term trading index funds with a return of over 30%, instead of buying U.S. bonds, which help U.S. government and under the U.S. government control. U.S. stock indices are relatively safe, highly liquid, and have returns that are several times or tens of times higher than those of U.S. bonds. They are not controlled by the United States government, and the claims of Wall Street and the U.S. Federal Reserve that the U.S. bond market is large and low risk are actually deceiving third world countries to use their hard-earned money to support U.S. Why a prominent mainland Chinese immigrant, a community leader, was imprisoned in Canada Part 2. The Trap of Capitalism. At the beginning, he was very naive and relied on his experience to write to the chairman of the China Investment Corporation, the Honourable Chairman Mr. Lu Jiwei. He suggested that China invest in the U.S. market index funds and short-term trading index funds with an annual return of over 30% instead of buying U.S. bonds, which help U.S. government and under the U.S. government control. U.S. stock indices are relatively safe, highly liquid, and have returns that are several times or tens of times higher than those of U.S. bonds. They are not controlled by the United States government, and the claims of Wall Street and the U.S. Federal Reserve that the U.S. bond market is large and low risk are actually deceiving third world countries to use their hard-earned money to support and make money for the United States by buying U.S. bonds. Currently, due to the appreciation of the U.S. dollar and the U.S. interest rate hike, bonds have depreciated significantly, causing huge losses for banks and even causing sudden bankruptcies of banks such as Silicon Valley Bank and Credit Suisse. The U.S. get rich by printing money, issuing bonds and securities, which caused the financial crisis of 2008, and the U.S. has been as a man of exploitation or sucker of the whole world. As a Chinese, he was stigmatized and became their scapegoat of the evil capitalist. As a hunter or sucker, whenever they had the opportunity, of course, they would not let him go. The financial crises and tsunamis in the U.S. all resulted in losses and complaints. Investors have no way to complain if banks and Wall Street made it. Everybody heard too big to fail and too small to jail. And immigrants like Mr. Tang are their ideal targets, attack objects, and scapegoats. The Securities Commissions of the United States, SEC, and Canada, OSC, have already begun accusing him. They first accused him of running a pyramid scheme, but finance itself is about liquidity. According to their definition, everyone in finance is running a pyramid scheme, including banks, U.S. government bonds, and listed companies. He was legitimate financing, not scamming money. He is making money for investors. Due to the tsunami, investors run and squeezed out, and Mr. Tang gave his own money, the appreciation of their house value, commission for making money for individual investors, nearly $2 million of Mr. Tang's own money, to investors. He did not take investors' money for himself. He never thought it was a crime. The Ontario Securities Commission and judicial authorities made his investors to suffer losses and insults so Mr. Tang could be blamed The authorities isolate Mr. Tang from his investors and supporters and froze and took their investment funds, stopped his trading and business, earning power, and tried their best to destroy Mr. Tang's legal defense capabilities. Mr. Tang originally thought that Canada's judiciary was advanced, fair, and operated according to the law. No one knows that they are deceiving people. They want to go to court time and time again to cheat taxpayers' money. A lawyer costs hundreds or thousands of Canadian dollars per hour. Dozens of lawyers and judges surround Mr. Tang's case, deceiving people's trust, slandering his personality, damaging his good reputation. The grand law and court have been turned into a tool and means of deception. The so-called judicial fairness, legal aid, and government legal funds are all deceiving people. Mr. Tang couldn't use the money from his own house for his legal defense, but white Canadian criminals can use their illegal gains for legal defense and have living expenses until they are convicted. Mr. Tang believed that Wall Street and Bay Street lawyers in Toronto are all scammers, and judges are not only scammers but also gangsters. They appear to speak legal language which people do not understand to make people believe judicial fairness, but in fact, they deprive people like him of their basic legal rights. People generally don't know the truth and worship them as gods, but a system scam. According to Canadian and Western law, human rights, and constitutional provisions, a big financial fraud case cannot proceed or continue without legal defense, defense financial statement, testimonies from independent and impartial experts, and defense witnesses. This is a stay proceeding without proper defense. However, Canadian authorities and the courts blatantly violated his constitutional rights, Charter of Rights and Freedoms, wrongfully placed him into prison in order to destroy his good Chinese reputation. OSC and the police caused huge losses to investors and blamed Mr. Tang for the crime. BTW, previously China had good relations with the United States and Canada. They did not oppose China, nor Communist Party. Now, China has risen fast, become strong, too strong to be targeted like Mr. Tang.